Hi, in this video we're learning how to use the Kotlin language, and what we plan to do here is capture some input from the user and convert that input into a number. So we're going to check to see if that number is accurate, and if it's not, we're going to give an error message. So what I have on the screen in front of me is leftover from the previous lesson where we did some integers and some doubles and did division. So I'm just going to take that away for now. And let's start with another piece of code. Okay, so I'm going to paste in some code here. You're going to see that I'm asking for user input. So please enter an integer. Notice I use the word print instead of print line, so it stays on one line. So I'm going to say save an input as my variable, and it's going to do a read line. So let's hover over that, and you're going to see that the data type that it's going to accept from that read line is a string. So I don't want a number. I don't want a string. I want a number, right? And so what I do next is this is a conversion. So after the variable name, I put in a dot and a little method called toInt. So let's delete that and type it again. So if I type a dot, and you're going to see a 2, you can do lots of things when you do a conversion. So we're picking toInt, but look down the list. You can see there's big decimals and there's big integers. There's all kinds of data types. And so we're only scratching the surface here. We got bytes and character arrays and floats and shorts. So we're going to just say, I want to do this as a toInt because I'm expecting an integer. And then it says, here's your integer. Let's see what happens when I run this. I'll go ahead and run this, and let's see, it says give me an integer. So I'm going to put in 99, and it seems to work. Now let's run it again, and this time we're not going to do our thing. I'm just going to put in NINE. So that's an integer, 9, right? Well, you can see that we have a horrible message that shows up, and we have a Java error. Isn't that interesting? We're writing in Kotlin, but we get errors that show up as a Java runtime. That shows us that we're really writing Java code. It's compiling to Java code. So it says here, for the input string, 9, it didn't work. And it tells us here on line 6 of main, it didn't run. So right here is where the error occurred. So I tried to convert a string to an integer, and obviously it died. And so if I were to go on with the program, if I had other lines to execute, they would just fail. The program crashed. So what I want to do then is gracefully make this happen. So if there is a mistake from the user, they don't fail and the program doesn't stop. So the code that we're looking for is called try and catch. So try means attempt to do something. So I'm going to move this right here. I'm just going to drag that up and say try to do a conversion. So we know that there's a potential for an error if the user input is wrong. So that's why we say try. All right, so I have this section called try. Now the matching part to that is called a catch. So catch means I'm going to check the error, and if something occurs, I will execute the code in between these curly brackets and not inside of the try. So it'll attempt to try it, and then it'll jump to here. So let's put in a generic message. I'm just going to say print line, and let's say an error occurred. Let's see if I can get that inside there. Okay, so now, let's see, did I spell that wrong? I did. Okay, so what's going on here? We still got something going on. It says parameter name expected. So I need a variable. I'm going to call this thing E, and the data type is exception. So it tells us that this exception is going to be handled inside the catch statement. So I could use this variable E, I could call it error, I could call it anything I want, but the data type is exception. So let's run this, and we're going to try to do some bad data again. So an integer comes up, and I'm going to type in a string, and you can see now that instead of crashing, the program says an error occurred, and it tells me that I typed in a 0. So the input was initially set to 0 and never was changed again, so that's why it says 0. So that is an example of try catch. There's also one more optional thing that you can do. It's called finally, and finally will always execute. And so I could just say that after I'm done, finally, I will print that there. So you get the same result pretty much. Now I'm going to also give an error message up here. I'm going to type in $error and then type in a property of error. So a dot after a variable sometimes works if it's called an object. It has multiple properties. And so all these purple things here are different properties. So I could say the message looks like a cause. I'm going to just try the message. So that will print off a nice message to say what kind of error it was. Let's go and run it again. So we put in our string ASDF and run. And it says here an error occurred for the input string ASDF. So not really explanation, but it does show what the message was. Okay, so let's clear off our code, start back with the original, and I'm going to paste in some new code. So let's see what we're up to now. So I'm going to do some calculations with doubles this time. So let's get a variable, save an input. So I'm going to do a decimal number this time. We're going to have a variable called double input, which gets our 0, 0. So the double will initially be 0. Then we're going to do our conversion. So save an input to a double conversion. And if this works, then we'll be able to have a double input. So let's try this again. And this time I should be able to put in decimal numbers. So if I try about 55.2, and sure enough, it works. If I were to type in a string here, you're going to see we got the same problem. It says an error occurred. So what you learned in this video was how to convert from a string into an integer, a string into a double, and then you can check for errors if the user input was wrong using try, catch, and finally. So in the next video, what we're going to do is show you the precision difference between float and doubles and why you would want to use one or the other. So stick with me and we'll continue to learn Kotlin.